readers infer or figure it out from details in the plot, the setting, and the characters, and so on. That choice is completely up to you. What I'd like you to do is identify the theme in the story in your study guide. Choose from one of these 3 themes. No pain, no gain. Don't try to do the impossible. Don't attempt too much at once. Then come back. A bystander said to him, "Be satisfied with half the quantity, and you will readily draw out your hand." From that sentence, I can infer the theme. Don't attempt too much at once. The second one, don't try to do the impossible, is close, but it's not quite right because it's not impossible for him to get the nuts out of the jar. His problem is he was greedy. So the better theme is don't attempt too much. Next, determine the theme of this story. Choose from one of these 3. Waste not, want not. Whatever you do, do it with all your strength. And unity, staying together, gives strength. Well, this one I have to try to figure out. The sticks break easily when they're separate, but they don't break when they're held together. So from this, I can figure out that unity, staying together, gives strength. And the old man on the point of death is trying to make the point to his children that after he dies, they should stick together and they should help each other rather than breaking apart, because if they stick together, they'll be much stronger. Style is the distinctive way that an author writes. Every short story has a very distinct style based on description, imagery, dialogue, figures of speech, sentence length, sentence structure, tone, and word choice. Now, earlier in this program, I had said to you that some of the techniques that you learn for short stories, for prose, can also be used for poetry. Figures of speech is a case in point. We'll discuss that a lot more later. But keep in mind that some of the stuff that you're learning to use creatively for short stories, you can also use creatively for other types of writing. What I'd like you to do now is identify the style of the story in your study guide. Choose from these 3. Is it simple and direct? Is it literary and descriptive? Or is it cold and gloomy? Then come back. I have long sentences and a lot of description. Rich, respected, influential, authoritative, a lot of adjectives. So this style is best described as literary and descriptive. What you want to do as a creative writer is you want to suit your style to your purpose and your audience. Authors often change their style to suit different kinds of writing and to suit different audiences. In a short story, you would use a style with a lot of dialogue and description. But in poetry, you would likely use a style with more imagery, figures of speech, and symbolism. You've probably heard about this creative writer. Actually, I'm going to bet that you've read most of his books. And he wrote material for adults, and he wrote material for kids. When he wrote his material for kids, he used rhyme, very simple words, and a lot of very silly stuff. When he wrote for adults, he used long sentences, long words, and much more serious subject matter. His name, of course, was Dr. Seuss. And if you read Dr. Seuss's children's stories, you'll find their style is suited to a 5 or 6-year-old, whereas adult stories, his style is suited to somebody in middle age. Many writers change their style like that. There are many ways to plan a short story. Let's try one now. Pause the program and plan your own short story about 2 children, Jamal and Mark. Let's say they find a lamp with a genie in it on the sidewalk as they're walking home from school. Your answer is undoubtedly very creative and a lot of fun. So let's try another way to plan a short story. Come up with totally new ideas for a new story. Now this one I've not given you anything to get you started. Choose a point of view, name and describe the main character or characters, describe the setting, the conflict, trace the plot on the diagram, and identify the theme. Then come back. When you have the time, choose one of these diagrams and write your short story. Be sure to keep the reader's interest with a good, compelling conflict, vivid characters, and lots of dialogue. Also, check that ending makes sense and leaves the reader feeling satisfied. Under no circumstances put something like, and we woke up and it was all a dream. Because that always leaves your reader feeling sort of cheated. I read all this and just found out that it was a dream. Now what I'd like you to do is to return to the pre-writing that you did at the beginning of this program. You remember that? We did it on music. Turn this pre-writing into an idea for a short story. You don't have to write the full short story now, but do write a paragraph or 2 that draws from your pre-writing. When you're done, please come back. You'll remember that my pre-writing was about jazz. I had come up with ideas on New Orleans and Billie Holiday and so on. So here are the first 2 paragraphs that I wrote for a short story about New Orleans. My theme is how the music and the citizens of New Orleans have inspired me. New Orleans is often called the most European of American cities. This is largely due to its unique combination of French, Spanish, Native American, and African American cultures. But it isn't the ethnic diversity, the fantastic cuisine, the majestic riverboats, or Mardi Gras floats that inspire me most. It's the jazz. It's the thought of little Louis Armstrong practicing his cornet at the Waifs' home. It's the thought of clarinets, trombones, tubas, and banjos marching in funeral processions as they play Just a Closer Walk with Thee. And it's the thought of present-day musicians scattered across the country after Hurricane Katrina doing their best to scrape by these many decades after jazz first lost favor with the fickle ears of mainstream America. Now, when I have time, I'm going to go back and I'm going to finish this story. We've discussed short stories, one important type of creative writing. Now I want to discuss poetry, another type of creative writing. It's not that easy to define poetry. Creative writing was relatively easy. God knows short stories are easy, but poetry is a little trickier. Here's the generally accepted definition. Poems are a type of literature in which words are selected for their beauty, sound, and power to express feelings. Traditionally, poems had a specific rhythm. A rhythm is a beat, and a specific rhyme. But such modern poetry as free verse does not have a regular beat, rhyme, or line length. But most poems are written in lines, and they're arranged in groups that are called stanzas. So we don't have a length for a poem. We don't have any requirements for any specific things. We just know that a poem has beautiful words, sounds, and emotions. However, most poems do have rhythm. Rhythm is a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables that create a beat, as in music. Meter is the other word for rhythm. A poetic foot, just like your foot, is the group of stressed and unstressed syllables that form a unit of verse. The pattern of these feet creates the rhythm. Here are the 4 metrical feet in English verse. You can see the unstressed looks rather like a U, and the stressed looks rather like an accent mark. I am unstressed, stressed. For example, Brazil. Trochee, the opposite, stressed, unstressed. For example, England. Anapest, 2 unstressed followed by a stressed, Mozambique. And a dactyl, which is the opposite of an anapest, stressed, unstressed, unstressed, Austria. Iambic pentameter is the most common meter, the most common beat in English poetry. P-E-N-T-A, penta, means 5, 5 meter. It's iambic pentameter, so it's 5 groups of iambs, or a pattern of 5 feet, each having 1 unstressed and 1 stressed. Iambic pentameter is probably the most common meter in English because it sounds like your heartbeat. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. 5. I waked, she fled, and day brought back my night. That's an example from John Milton. Now, poems come in many different forms because we said there's no one form for a poem. To unlock your creativity,